Okay, good morning everybody. Welcome to Tanya in Education, chapter 35. This morning we're going to start a new section of the Tanya, really. Until now, we were dealing with the Beinoni, with the intermediate man, trying to help him understand his mission, trying to help him when he has troubles, emotional ups and downs in service of God. But now in chapter 35, Rabbi Shneur Zalman asks a very important question. What's the point? What do we need it for? If a person is being told that his whole life is going to be a struggle, he's never going to defeat his Yetzer Hara, he's never going to defeat his evil inclination. So he's going to turn back to the author of the Tanya, or turn back to the Ribbono Shel Olam, the master of the world, and say, Master of the world, why did you create me thus? Why did you create me with this insurmountable challenge that I could never overcome? I could never master my heart. I could never master my desires for the wrong thing. I'm constantly struggling to control myself. So this is the big question that we begin chapter 35 with. And I'll just preface with an anecdote, maybe to help us understand where we're going to answer this. There was one time two people that were at the bottom of a mountain, and one of them asked the other, can you please help me carry this bag? He picks up the bag, and he feels that there are feels like rocks in the bag. It's very very heavy. He starts to climb with his fellow, and after a few minutes, he starts getting tired and needs a rest. But his friend that gave him the bag has got all the energy in the world, is bouncing, doesn't understand. They reach the halfway point. This guy is still moving. He's huffing and puffing, groaning. Oy, what a schlep. I can't do it anymore. Finally, he turns to his friend. He says, how are you doing this? Where's your energy coming from? He says, well, open up the bag and look inside. He opens up the bag and looks inside and sees inside the bag is not rocks, but diamonds. He says, whatever you can take to the top, you can keep. Oh, suddenly the energy returns. He's, pushes ahead, mission-driven to get to the top. It's a famous anecdote. The idea is that we're going to tell the Beinoni, we're going to tell the intermediate man that his struggle is not hopeless. Why does one lose heart? One loses heart when one is struggling in vain, for no purpose. And we tell the Beinoni that, no, your struggle, the Alter Rebbe uses the words, Zois tia nechmasei becheflayim. This should be his comfort in a double measure of comfort. What's the double measure of comfort? That he should understand that specifically by his struggle, by him being who he is, he's not a tzaddik, he's not a person who has complete control over his heart. He's somebody who struggles with it. That is fulfilling God's mission, as we're going to explore in later chapters, for the entire world. And as we're going to explore in this chapter, this is going to cause, specifically his struggle, causes God's presence to dwell on him when he has this struggle. Who would not want that special connection? It's worth more than diamonds, right? To be connected with the infinite, with the divine, to have that access to God every day in our daily lives. So this is the general idea that we're going to be giving in chapter 35. And he opens up that we really need to understand the concept. Before earlier chapters, we were explaining the pasuk, that when Moshe was going to pass away, he told the Jewish people, what does God want of you? He doesn't want you to go over the seas or go up to the heaven to acquire the Torah. Ki karov elecha, it's close to you, it's near to you, it's attainable. Beficha, in your mouth, uvavavcha, in your heart, la soto, that you may do it. And as the Tanya interprets, this is the three, referring to the mastery of the three garments of man that man could possibly master: his thought, speech, and action, which are the expressions of the soul. This is what the Beinoni, the intermediate person, is able to master. He's able to master what he chooses to dwell on in his mind. He's able to master what he chooses to speak about. And he's able to master what he chooses to do. What's in his heart, he may not necessarily master. That's tzaddik territory. And now the Alter Rebbe says, okay, we've been discussing in your mind, the intellectual contemplation of God. We've been discussing, Torah study, which is primarily with one's mouth. And now on to the last soto, the physical actions. And he introduces with the question, what's the point, right, if the Beinoni can never win? And he says this is going to be his comfort. And he says to understand how he's going to be comforted by this knowledge, that God will rest on him in his service. Let us preface with a statement of the Zohar HaKadosh, the Holy Zohar. The Zohar quotes King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech, Chacham einav berosho. A wise man, his eyes are in his head. Says the Zohar. Well, obviously, right? Where should his eyes be, if not in his head? So the Zohar explains that Shlomo HaMelech is referring to the spiritual truth that the Chacham, the wise person, who's truly wise, Einav, his eyes, where does he put his focus? Birosho, with the one that dwells, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, which dwells on the head of a Jew when he performs a mitzvah. And we compare the soul of man to a candle. This is a famous idea, right? Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam. It's very appropriate now that we're in the Hanukkah season. That just like a candle will not burn unless, it will burn too fast, actually, if you don't have enough oil, right? The more oil you have, the longer the flame will stay on the wick. If you don't have enough oil, the wick will be consumed very quickly and just, won't light very well. So too, the soul of man, our job is to cause God to dwell on us through adding fuel to the godly fire. And what is that fuel? The Torah that we study, the mitzvahs that we perform physically. Now you may ask a question, well, wait a minute. Why do I need to add fuel to my spiritual fire? Do I not have a godly soul that's a spiritual entity? Why do I need spiritual fuel? I should already be connected with God. Well, implied over here is that the godly soul, although it is a spiritual being, is a created being. And even though it's very spiritual, any created being is limited by being a creation and is not actually God, which is infinite. And then the Alter Rebbe spells it out clearly, saying even if one were to be a complete tzaddik, a complete righteous person that never sins, that only wants to learn Torah and do mitzvot all day, totally attached, right? Like we want to stop pointing fingers over here, okay? And right, even if one is on the highest level, right? Nevertheless, we are creations, we're physical beings, right? Even if we're perfect physical beings, like let's say it were to be so, let's say it were to be possible, we would still not be able to grasp an infinite God, a creator that is infinite. There's no end to his greatness. So what's the way, what's the mechanism through which we can relate to God if he's infinite? Even if I'll be a perfect tzaddik, I can never grasp him. So what's the point? Says the Alter Rebbe, that is why we need that fuel. What is the fuel that we're putting in our candle, in our soul's candle? We are doing God's will, the Ratzon HaElyon, the will of the One on High. the way to relate to God Himself is not through my own understanding of how I want to relate to God, because that's serving myself or serving my ideas. The way to relate to God is by doing that which is God's will. Then you could be sure, maybe I don't understand it, maybe I understand a little on my level, but I'm able to access God on God's terms, on God's infinite terms. This is what God gave me a mission to do, and if I fulfill this particular mitzvah, this particular task, I'm relating to God on God's infinite level. How does that work? That's the magic that only God can do. God can do the impossible. He can take His infinite self and give us access to it through the learning of the Torah and the study and the performance of the mitzvahs in this physical world. So we tell the Beinoni, take heart. This struggle that you have is you're actually achieving more than a perfect soul could achieve, because by you struggling to fulfill God's actual will practically, you're causing God to dwell on you. Not only that, but as we will learn in the next chapter, the goal of this world is to have God dwell in the lowest physical space, to reveal God at a place where God seemingly hid Himself completely, where there is no revelation of God. And the Beinoni does that better than everybody else. Because through the way God created us, that we have this, we were talking about these two souls in Tanya, the godly soul and the animal soul. And it's not like they're separate from each other, they're enmeshed with each other. Right? The godly soul cannot access and control the body by itself. He has to the animal soul must cooperate. The godly soul must influence the animal soul to make a bracha before he eats, to go daven, to go and open the book and learn some Torah. It won't happen just by godly soul power. The godly soul is within the animal soul and influencing him. In that case, when the godly soul struggles and he has his difficulty and he does the mitzvah, he is in fact elevating that animal soul and connecting it with God. And that gives the greatest satisfaction to God, as we will explore in future chapters. So, now the Alter Rebbe at this point mentions an interesting note. The Alter Rebbe mentions that in Kabbalistic terms, the first sphira, the first created spiritual wave, channel through which God relates to creation is called Chokhmah, right? And that is comprised of two words, Koach Ma, a ability to ask what. Why is that? Because the first prerequisite for us to connect with God is the ability to open ourselves up and realize that we don't have all the answers, that we are not the wisest, that even if we were to be the perfect tzaddik, we'll never grasp an infinite God. To open ourselves up and say, what? What do you want from me, God? How can I connect with you? That chokhmah, that opens us up to the inspiration of our neshama, to the inspiration of our godly soul, and that is how we can begin to connect with Him. And on anything where there is bitul, where there's this submission, to be able to give ourselves over to God, that's where God will dwell. Okay? So then, the Alter Rebbe ends the chapter by bringing up a question that's brought in the Talmud. A certain heretic, a certain non-believer came to Rabbi Gamliel. And he said, Rabbi, how many gods, how many divine presences do you have? Right? It says every time 10 Jews gather together for a minyan, for a group to pray, the Shekhinah, the God's presence rests over there. So how many gods do you have? We have one God in this synagogue, one God in that synagogue. What's going on over here? So Rabbi Gamliel answered him, no, we have one God, but it can be compared to an analogy of the sun and opening a window. There's one sun shining in the sky. Everybody can open their own window and let the one sun shine into their room. It doesn't change the fact that there's one sun. Says the Alter Rebbe over here, right? This is what we're saying to the Beinoni. You can make many windows for God in your life. By the performance of your mitzvah, you are letting God into your life. He's everywhere, yes. But it's only through, but he's hidden, and it's only through opening that window that He gives us the opportunity to perform. And the Beinoni, through struggling, in the lowest struggle, is actually fulfilling and has access to make that window better than someone who does not struggle. That is how God comes to rest. Just to end off with a lesson for education. So I was thinking about 2 points. And Mitzvah Hashem, I'll develop them further in the blog post. But number one, tests maybe are not everything. The scores that we get on a test, right, is not necessarily everything. Because if you think about what we just said, right, even the most intellectual, the perfect tzaddik is trying to grasp God in his his best of his abilities. He's an A+ student, that's complete tzaddik. But God is infinite, doesn't get it. Right? It's not abstract. God is more than his comprehension. And perhaps it works that way in real life too. When you take a student and we give him some material, study this for the test, right? And he can get an A+ on the test. Does that guarantee that he can go into real life and apply that knowledge in the actual world? Knowledge is perhaps an abstract thing, and to apply it to the real world, one needs to actually experience. One needs to do it. One needs to struggle. One needs to get in it and give themselves over and put themselves on the side and actually roll up their sleeves and engage with the practical application of that knowledge. So that's perhaps one strategy that we can take for education over here is, of course, we've got to teach knowledge and we've got to give tests to measure the knowledge, but as much as possible, if we can expose our students, ourselves, our children to real world experiences of applying that knowledge and getting their whole selves involved in applying, right? That'll be a much better guarantee that we actually get it, that we actually succeed. Because knowledge can be abstract and it can be not real until we actually experience it. Another interesting point to end off with is the idea of chokhmah, the idea of the power to ask what. Perhaps understanding what it says in the textbook is important, but it's the ability to put aside what I know before and look at the world with a new lens and ask what? What don't I know yet? Or what possibilities can be created here that opens me up to creativity that can really take one's education, one's knowledge to a new level. And in today's day and age, we see that more and more. Right? So many inventions and ideas are coming out by people who are able to just step back and say, okay, what is possible? Not what has been in the past, but what is possible for the future. So wish everybody that our souls on Hanukkah and throughout the year should be filled with the oil, with the fuel, the godly fuel of Torah and mitzvot, should give us power to truly put ourselves on the side and connect with the divine and bring much blessing in our day-to-day lives on a daily basis and be an inspiration to many others. Happy Hanukkah.